America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Wonderful to see everybody. It's finally getting a little chilly outside, feeling like fall. I would just like to give the regrets of Mrs. Case and Mr. Pinto. They send their regrets they were not able to make the meeting tonight. I want to put a big congrats to our football team. They played amazing, and the amount of community members and staff at the football team was a wonderful sight to see. It was definitely a highlight of the weekend. Also, I want to thank all of our teachers and our technology department for the wonderful handiwork for our virtual parent conferences at the high school last night. Went very smoothly. And I would like to remind everyone, I'd like to tell everybody that this Thursday, we are commemorating the Veterans Day, and it's going to be a lovely service. And we have our 5th graders involved. So if you can come down, it's at 1:30? 1:45 at Linda. And I would also like to just give one more big thank you to Mr. Epstein, Mr. DeVito, and Mr. Kramer for the new pickleball courts at the high school. Back to tennis, they look amazing. So thank you to everybody, and now I am leaving it all to our wonderful superintendent.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Conway. Tonight we'll do the reverse of what we've been doing before, and we'll just start with a quick update on our audit standards.
Thank you, Dr. Gallagher, and thank you to the Board of Education for inviting me here this evening. So each for the community, each year the school district is subject to an external audit. So it's an analysis and review of the financial records of the district. And we do that in accordance with various standards that are established under the profession. And our report tonight's a positive report. The district is in good financial condition, and they have a very good internal control structure in place. Just a reminder to the community, the internal control structure is the checks and balances over the financial transactions. As I explained to the Board of Education when we had our planning meeting, we started with a risk assessment of the financial control structure. And the risk assessment showed that there were good controls in place. And then we developed an audit program. How are we going to audit the transactions and the account balances? So the reports are very voluminous. As you know, you have 4 documents that I shared with you. The larger is a general purpose financial statement. It's almost 70 pages. It gives you information on all of the funds, both at the balance sheet date and revenues, expenditures for the year ending. And there's also another set of financial statements on the accrual basis, which is not the way the school district maintains their books and records, but the professional standards require us to present information to you in that format. Just as a reminder, that's for information purposes. It's really not a good working model because it shows you all liabilities and all assets, whether or not they have any outcome as far as the budget that was just passed and the expenditure that took place. To remember, there's capital assets, there's other post-employment benefit liability. It's just a model for someone to understand the direction that the school district's going in. There are some differences between the numbers from last year and 2021. And it has to do predominantly with the actuarial assumptions. So we remember there's numbers such as other post-employment benefits, as I said, the district share of the retirement system obligation, even though you don't control what that is. And those are based on actuarial assumptions. And to the extent that those assumptions were better than what the previous year's assumptions are, and those are the standards that tell us whether or not we can rely on those assumptions. That will drive what those liabilities will be. So when you look at the financial statement, the OPEB liability decreased quite a bit because the discount rate increased. So the higher the discount rate, the lower the liability. I just encourage you when you look at that set of financial statements, the statement of net position and the statement of activities, that you also look at the supplementary information because it's trending information over the last number of years. It shows you, based on those assumptions, how sensitive those numbers are, okay? But as I mentioned, that's not the way the district maintains the books and records, but to be in compliance and have a clean opinion, you need to present the 2 sets of financial statements. So some financial highlights: the district's unassigned fund balance is at 4% of the subsequent year's budget. So you're in compliance with real property tax law. And I know the Board of Education works really hard on the budget, and the administration works really hard to deliver the financial results in accordance with the budgets. I think everyone did a really good job as far as that's concerned. Reserves that you have are all in accordance with general municipal law and education law as it relates to the capital reserve. And so there has been some funding, and there is a financial statement disclosure as to the activity in the capital reserves. There are 2 of them. With respect to the food service fund, I just wanted to make a comment because there's a lot of additional COVID money that was collected. This year there was a positive result in the food service fund. So not only was there additional funding and source of revenues as far as CARES Act or COVID funding, but the district did really monitor their expenditures, and they spent about $130,000 less than the previous year. So I know you've worked really hard to move in that direction, so I just didn't want to acknowledge that. The other thing that you might have noticed was the refinancing of the energy performance contract. So the district took advantage of $1.4 million of savings by refinancing their energy performance contract. And you'll see the new debt service schedule in the financial statement disclosures. And one of the management's discussion and analysis behind financial highlight bullets will discuss that savings. And then the other 2 things that I just wanted to bring to your attention was we talked a little bit at the planning meeting about GASB 87 and implementing that. And so that has to do with right to use or leases. So there's a number of leases that the school district has. They've been reflected in this financial statement. You'll see them in the disclosures and other long-term liabilities. And you'll also see in the capital asset disclosure the addition of those new leases. And there's a description as to what those leases contain. The last thing I just wanted to bring your attention to is back on page 64 in the supplementary information. There's a schedule of the capital projects, and this includes both the capital reserve transfer that was approved by the community in May 2022, because at the time it's incorporated in this year's financial statement. And it also includes the status of the Superstorm Sandy projects, okay? And so the Board of Education did go ahead and resolve to transfer the insurance deductible funds through the general fund over to the capital project fund. When you look at it's the 3rd row on that schedule, and you get the opportunity on page 64, you'll see that the change in budget is the transfer. Okay, so the transfer that had been approved, that could be the change between the 2021 budget and the 2022 budget. And you can see off to the right at this juncture, the amount that's still outstanding. So I know the district has been working really hard with the state and with FEMA to try to wrap this up and bring it to conclusion, at which point then there will be funding that will be available, and that will cover the shortfall that's depicted here. In addition to the general purpose financial statement, the state wants us to also audit the extra classroom activity funds, cash basis. So these are the students' activities in conjunction with faculty advisor. It's a cash basis report, receipts and disbursements during the year. And they started the year collectively with account balances of about $60,000, and they ended the year with about $72,000. So we look at receipts and disbursements and backup supporting documentation as to the transactions. We have a communication to the Board of Education. It's under the standards AUC 260. If there were any difficulties in performing the audit, they would be noted here. I really appreciate the access to the staff. We talk to the staff in private that are related to, that are involved in the financial control cycles. And we also are requesting information continuously. And I really want to thank Mr. DeVito and the staff for being very forthcoming and timely with when we requested something that they were there giving it to us right away. The other communication that we had is a management letter. And so there are no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. So the internal control structure is working. We had some comments we raised in the previous year. Those comments have been cleared. So you'll note that when you look at the management letter draft. There's one comment in the extra classroom area having to do with sales tax, and there's a comment dealing with personnel activity reports. Okay, and this is the support documentation for individuals whose time is spent on grants through which the district is reimbursed.
Excuse me, can you make sure that your microphone is on, just for the live stream?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay, thank you.
So those are the two comments. And so I was very pleased with the results of the audit, and I hope the Board of Education was too when they read the reports.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sandy.
Thank you so much for this wonderful report. Trustees, Ms. Bruno, do you have any questions?
I just have a couple of real quick questions, and the first one is about that personnel activity report. I saw that comment. Is that resolved, or is there some kind of a solution that is going to resolve that issue?
So we had tested a sample of personnel activity reports across a number of grants. And this is not pervasive, but there are occasions where on a monthly basis, the activity report was not present for an employee. Mr. DeVito was aware of it and he's following up on it, okay, as to where they might be or the reason why they might not have been created.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I just have two other questions. The first one, Mr. DeVito was kind enough to explain some, to go over the variance, the year-end variance report with me. And he was explaining to me that because of some of the changes that you talked about and because of some federal money, we ended up with a plus amount of money in our food services account this year. But he said on the recommendation of the auditor, that money came out of the food service account and went back into the general fund. Now, as a trustee, I would prefer it stay in the food service account because next year, when we're looking at the budget, I can say, how much is in that food service account? Now, maybe we don't need to put a $300,000 subsidy in because we already have $200,000 in there. But if I go look at it next year, it's gonna say 0 instead of 206. So my question is, why can't we leave that money in the food services line?
So the budgeted transfer to the food service fund is to cover the anticipated loss. Okay, it's not typically to move money over to show a profit in the food service fund. Okay, it's the estimate of what the shortfall is going to be. So it's not that we moved money out of the food service fund, you sized the transfer at an amount, and what was the exact amount of the budget to transfer?
300,000
Okay.
went to cover.
Right, and if you look at the financial statement, in order to show a break even, you only needed $95,000, okay? Next year, because the board provided for the 2023 budget, the repayment of that money, which was the previous year's shortfall, it's about 147?
56.
156, I don't have it in front of me right now. It's still sitting in non-spendable. Those resources will be coming over because you provided for it in your budget. So to my knowledge, you can only transfer over that which you have not shown, which you haven't broke even on food service.
Okay, so my solution as a trustee would be to say to Mr. DeVito, how much of that subsidy did we use in the last 3 years? If I said, gee, I want to look at whether we need this $300, right? And then he would be able to look at the financials and tell me the exact amount of it as opposed to what the subsidy itself.
Right, all things being equal, if there's no other changes, that's absolutely correct. And you would get a sense as to what you needed in previous years. And it's difficult to say because you've been working towards also containing costs. So I look at the numbers for 2020 and the shortfall was about $489,000 before the transfer. The shortfall for 2021 was $325,000. So you were moving in the correct direction, and then you, as I mentioned, we even cut the cost even more this year, $130,000. But that's exactly what I would do, just look at historical trending to get a sense of
So Ms. Sandy, did you just continue with that same kind of trend? So it was 465, then it was 340 or something like that?
It was 489 shortfall,
Right.
325 shortfall, and a positive of 99,000.
Right. This is not counting any transfers from the
That's
general
correct. So the only thing the transfer took care of this year was the deficit, okay, because we had to cure that.
Okay, my last question is, you rightfully point out that we've been getting a lot of extra revenue streams recently, basically from the federal government. And that we are going to be eventually losing those revenue streams, despite the fact that we have implemented programming that uses those revenue sources. So my question for you is, do you have any suggested path for us to follow to obviate the impact, of those revenue streams going away on either the budget or on the tax levy? Because as you know, we've had a 0% tax levy for 2 years in a row. So it's just kind of a general question. You might not have any, but I love that you pointed it out because that's a concern for me as well.
And it's a concern for the auditors, and it's a concern for every single school district because those are non-repetitive revenues, as we know. And other than cost containment, I don't know how much of that could take place utilizing reserves, which you have been utilizing reserves through your budget and appropriating fund balance, it's difficult. Okay, I don't really have the magic answer. I'm sorry about that.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. It was a wonderful report, and your presentation was wonderful as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't remember a presentation that brief as many times as I'm here, so I guess brief is good. I just want to say I want to thank the Mr. DeVito's office, Mr. Hers, and Mrs. Marie, I thank them. But, we're unfortunately in the midst of the state audit that comes every 6 years. I just want to say, when I get news that the state is coming, I'm confident of our state. I don't get anxious anymore because I always think that you do a pretty comprehensive job and you let us know if in fact there were concerns. So I'm just grateful for your service and grateful for you coming out here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's my pleasure to work with the school district.
I would also like to echo Dr. Ryan's sentiments. I really want to thank Mr. Peter's office and you as well for giving us such a comprehensive report so we can clearly see where our district is budget-wise and where we can go. Ms. Verona raised an excellent question about what are we going to do without this better reserve money. So if you do come up with any suggestions, please let us know. But thank you, thanks so much for coming and giving us such a thorough report.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start tonight just with a very brief update, and Mr. DeVito can just click through to me on our strategic planning process. As I have been updating the board, we've been continuing to get feedback through the Thought Exchange platform. And most recent 2 polls had to do with facilities improvements. And if you just click forward. You can see that the feedback from the community, the number 1 suggestion for facilities improvements to prioritize air conditioning and improve the HVAC units in all buildings. Close behind that, renovations in high school and middle school, locker room improvements, more grassy areas in east and west, and to perhaps consider expanding our outdoor learning spaces beyond water classrooms, which goes with some of the feedback we got from instructional programming that we've been starting to build with programs and parents and community members would like to see those even more. Of course, these are people's dream wish list. It doesn't necessarily mean that the district can afford to do all these things, but again, this process is about helping us give feedback to the community about what they support so that we can set compatible goals and consider those moving forward. The other question was about how we can better support and involve families. We got some varying ideas on that. I think we have a larger contingent of working parents, and there were a number of ways that parents suggested that evening meetings, PTA would work better. Many parents suggested more virtual options for things, ways that it's easier for the parent to participate virtually in an evening meeting and you don't have to get childcare little children and all they can do that while they're at home. They requested some parent workshops on topics like health and nutrition, and how to limit their child's social media. I need that workshop as well. They also asked for instruction on the parent portal, Google, and some streamlined communications. And we actually are looking into a program which we hope may streamline our communications in the future. We've been looking for that one platform that'll kind of replace everything that we've been using and make it easier and more parent friendly, and we hope we might have found that. There was a request for better orientations in kindergarten families. We do the kindergarten orientation in February ahead of all of the selections, but some of the families suggested that maybe a parent orientation again, either closer to when kindergarten starts or right afterwards would be helpful. And finally, that we consider offering more bilingual events, and again, unifying our community through bilingual events rather than separate events or, events that are only in English. In terms of next steps, there's still one more feedback question that'll go home actually tomorrow. And that's how to address chronic absenteeism, which has been a problem in this community for many years, and particularly during COVID. And then we will take all the themes together and in some format, which we're still going to decide with the steering committee, put everything out, the themes that have emerged, put it out to the community one more time for feedback. Anybody who didn't get a chance, anybody who's had ideas that they thought about afterwards, and get some additional feedback there. We did conduct an in-person meeting in Spanish and another meeting in English in person. The steering committee has 2 more meetings. They will use those last 2 meetings to kind of pull together the data and present some recommendations to the Board of Education. They will discuss the plan at the January 10th board meeting and hopefully adopt it. And we're excited. Most of the feedback that we've gotten was kind of feedback that we were thinking about too. So it's nice to hear that our community, for the most part, supports the vision of schools and supports where we think we need to go for our children. And that will help us to set goals that are appropriate and kind of keep them as our North Star as we plan year district action plans. And so with that, Mr. DeVito will present tonight on future capital projects and some ways that we can respond to some of the things that the community has requested in terms of capital improvements.
Thank you, Dr. Gallagher. I'd like to just segue from the feedback we received from the recent strategic planning thought exchange question relating to facilities. We see that air conditioning from our schools is a popular request, along with bathroom renovations at Long Beach Middle School and Long Beach High School. Requests for grassy areas at East and West. So great. If I just speak in this voice, will the live feed pick it up?
Michael, yes.
Okay, thank you. The grassy areas of East and West, along with the expansion of the district's outdoor learning spaces, as Dr. Gallagher said. And last year, when the Capital Project Subcommittee reviewed the building reports that come from our architect, the Building Conditions Survey, the Capital Project Subcommittee suggested that maybe we create 2 categories. One that has to do with a smaller subset of projects that we would consider, and we did. We put that as a ballot proposition on the May 2022 ballot, and it passed. And then another column called Future Bond. And the board subcommittee at that point said, let's wait a year, let's circle back, and that's what we're doing right now, is we're now picking up where we left off, talking about all the needs that we have just for infrastructure, for just to keep our buildings in a good state of repair, and joining that discussion with some feedback that we got through the strategic planning process. So what we're trying to do tonight is to restart the conversation about what a bond might look like if we want to go forward with a bond, talk a little bit about that process. So I'm not going to go into all the detail here. It's part of your presentation. It will be on the website again, but I do want to point out some highlights here. So this is that column that says Future Bond, and this is what we had from last year. May 2022 authorization are the projects that were part of this past year's ballot proposition, and we're already in the process waiting for the state to approve those projects. So if we take a look at some of these projects, for example, like the family and consumer science renovations, the pool reconstruction, it really lists projects that our architect went in with his team to say, this is something you need to address. These are items over the next 5 years that the district should address, and a bond, a large-scale borrowing where we can do all of these projects is really the best way to accomplish that, and later on I'm going to talk about why. Another thing I want to point out is some of the things we did pull out, like for example, this is in progress, something that we did an overhead door at the auto shop, because certain things, even though maybe listed as a future bond, things accelerate in terms of the need to address it, so that this is something we're addressing. In terms of the cafeteria lines, something over the next couple of months we want to talk about, maybe we want to add some scope to that. If we are going to go forward with the bond, maybe we want to do something more than just look at the service line, maybe we want to look at the floor or the overall space to make it, a more exciting and hospitable environment for the kids when they eat. Something else I want to point out is when we did do the costing last year, unfortunately, costs have gone up about 15%. So that at each page, and I added it at the end, there is a cost escalation factor of 15% just from 1 year. So that's the high school. Now, Lido Complex, I want to point out something here from last year is we did do a subset of work, this 11.975, we didn't do all of it as we had talked about initially last December, but we did do some. So what remains is $5.5 million. That's going to be part of what we're proposing for next year, and that includes the HVA system for Lido and for the middle school, wherever there is an air conditioning. So the main thing that we see here in all of these buildings and the largest cost item is air conditioning. There are other items having to do with windows or turf field replacement, but the big ticket item is always going to be the air conditioning. And again, whatever this number is, we have to add 15%. West Elementary School, again, some stuff with sidewalks, because we're responsible for the sidewalks. Our water heater is needed. We want to redo some bathrooms over at West School, but again, the $3.8 million figure, air conditioning. Over at Lindell, we do want to address the bulkhead. That is something that's pressing, and we do need to take care of sooner rather than later. Again, some sidewalks, some fire escape work, vinyl tile flooring. We want to replace what we call VCT and replace it with something that does not have the asbestos in it. But that number again, $9.2 million for improved heating and ventilating and air conditioning. At East, again, more asphalt, some interior walls, some ceiling replacements, and the 5.3 for the air conditioning. Nike Learning Center, sidewalk replacement we already had going up to the state. That was something we pulled out. That was part of last May's authorization, boiler room, ventilation, fire alarm systems. Comparative low number compared to the other buildings. Transportation building, the storage building again was part of the May authorization, but we do need to address the roof, some underground storage tanks over in the transportation bus garage, and the maintenance building. Some exterior masonry work I want to point out, some roofing, ventilation here as well. Other possible capital items to be considered when we talk, and I know it came up in some of the feedback in the thought exchange question about perhaps some sort of green space. One of the things that the principals had asked for, and they started asking for it last year, was some green, maybe some turf over the playgrounds at East and West. If we are going to go forward with the bond, we may want to consider something more comprehensive, perhaps a complete overhaul of the playgrounds. I know kids have been talking about gaga pits and things of that sort to really make it an exciting, not only for the kids, but for the community to just completely overhaul those play areas that are in relatively urban settings, with Weston and East compared to Lindell and Lido, and take a look at what other school districts have and come up with some sort of proposal. So this is something we'd like to work on over the next couple of months. This is already in progress. We talked about that last year, replacing the air conditioning unit at the West School. And we do want to install some additional lighting into the Lindell Auditorium, replace the wood chips that you see in the playground over in Lido and Lindell with some new play surfaces, And a new item here, the waterproofing, the concrete parapets in each stair tower at the high school was something else that over the past year has become a problem for us, and we do want to address, so that we want to add that to the items to be considered. Before talking about financing, I just want to pause for a second and talk about when we do think about a bond and going forward with a bond, we absolutely want to think about addressing all of the, what we call the maintenance or infrastructure needs. But then there are also some, like, perhaps, you know, if you want to think about like a wish list type of a project, because now is the time to do it, because it's rare that you get an opportunity, maybe every 15 years, to consider doing a bond, because the debt service is about a 15-year period, where you don't want to backfill that debt service. So when you're thinking about doing something that's exciting for the school district, something, you know, that's extra special with the facilities, for example, when you put in the new library over in the middle school here, that was, you know, kind of like a wow project that we were really excited about. We may want to, as a board, as a community, think about what we may want to do elsewhere in the district, so that it's something, now is the time, so to speak, because it's rare that you get an opportunity to go out for a bond if that's something the board decides that they want to do. So how would we finance this? So as I said, a bond issue is an advantageous way to plan and complete large projects without creating the spike in the tax service. So what we do typically, if it's not a bond issue, is we put money in the general fund budget. It becomes transferred to capital, and it's usually like several millions of dollars to do maybe $1 million or $2 million to take care of something that's an immediate need. We also have the opportunity to use our capital reserve fund as a way of also doing some sort of a project. But if you're going to do a big project like air conditioning, right, that costs several millions of dollars, then it's that bond issue is a way of doing that. It's also advisable to substitute retiring debt service. So we have some debt service that's going to retire so that there's no tax impact. So that's something else that you're going to hear me stress, is that whatever we do when we go forward with the bond issue, we do not want it to affect the tax levy. We want it to be a no tax impact bond issue, so there's no additional burden on the community. So some timing and some numbers. At the end of school year 2025, 2026, 5.4 million of annual debt service will fall off, which means it will no longer be part of the budget. So there's the opportunity to come up with a new project with new debt service that can get close to that amount or be somewhat lower than that amount, again, for that no tax impact, okay? And how we do that, if we want to approve something this May, we can do short-term borrowing for about 2 years before we would have to go forward with a bond. So we're talking about it now. It's the first real conversation, because I know the board said, hey, let's wait. Last year when we talked about it, they said, let's wait a year and reconsider it next year, and now it's next year. It's talking about it now, coming up with a scope of work, perhaps putting it on a ballot, perhaps May, perhaps next October, okay? So at some point in the near future, and then we know, once we get that approval, then the architect has to do the specifications, they have to do the designs, they have to send it up to the state. And what we're told is that the timeline can be 1 to 2 years to get permits, to get approval. So we can't begin the work. So we're talking about it now, but we really can't begin the work probably before the summer of 2024 or 2025, more like 2025, right? So that's why you have to start so early in the conversation, because to get the approvals and to get the financing and to get everything that we need to line it up so that we can start the work, it's several years. What's happened recently on Long Island regarding bond votes? So just this past October, so a lot of times, let me talk to you about this October timeframe, a lot of times districts will not want, even though we did it here in Long Beach back in 2009, when we had the bond vote, at the same time we had the budget vote, many districts are apprehensive about doing that, and they'll separate it. So they'll have the bond vote in the fall, because they're concerned that if there is some negative feeling about a bond, they don't want that to carry over onto the budget. And that's why you see here May versus maybe February or versus October in terms of when a district will go out for a bond vote. So Elwood here, 2.4 million, they decided that they wanted to try to get some fields, some new turf fields, and it failed. Okay, they had tried back in 2017, it failed then, and then they wanted to try again, and the new field that they wanted, turf field, failed. PadMed, $45 million, was a air conditioning throughout their buildings, and that also failed. Everything else that you see here, going back to October 2022, just last month, back in West Hampton Beach, passed 88%. You see the approval ratings on the right, bond amount, and then the date. And this is Eastport, South Mountain, 90 million back in February. That passed. And this is the slide from last year, showing all the bond issues that had passed over the last several years. So for the most part, on Long Island, when a district puts a bond issue up, it does pass, but there are some instances when it doesn't. So the board and the community does need to be prepared. It's not a sure thing that sometimes the community does vote it down. Here's a summary of the costs. Again, I'm picking this up from those pages that I briefly touched on earlier, and then I gave the 15% cost escalation factor. So we're talking right now at $62.3 million if we round up in terms of where we are right now. That's addressing building needs from an infrastructure standpoint, taking care of the air conditioning that Mr. Grillo had estimated the scope. We talked about this last year, but it does include that cost escalation factor. Anything else that we may want to come up with, like revamping the playgrounds, doing something additional bathrooms that we talked about, some outdoor green space, maybe a dock. Maybe an idea I had was perhaps having a dock that goes from the high school to a dock at Nike to kind of improve some of the learning experience for kids. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about in terms of future thinking. What could be exciting for our students would then be more than the $62.3 million. And that's what I have for tonight. Comments and questions from the board.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeVito. Ms. Verona?
Sure. Okay, thank you, Mr. DeVito. I appreciate all this. Are you looking from us for our thoughts on when and when we should be doing a bond vote? Are you looking for that now, or are you looking for?
I'm not really looking for any specific feedback from the board. I wanted to reintroduce the conversation of a bond because it's a big decision. And I wanted the board to have time to consider it. I wanted the board to have time to consider not just what we're proposing from an infrastructure standpoint, but also some projects that you may have heard from community members, whether it's a playground, whether it's a dock, whether it's some sort of expanded learning opportunity at the Nike environmental center, things we've been talking about, greenhouses, all those kinds of things that we've been talking about. For you to say, hey, now's the time. Now's the time to bring it to our attention. So Mr. Kramer, Mr. Grillo, and I can then do the work in terms of what does that look like? What does it look like in terms of scope? What does it look like in terms of cost? We can certainly hear feedback that you want to share in terms of thinking about the possibility of a bond issue or the timing of it. Happy to hear it, but really what I'm asking the board to do is to start thinking about this now and to think about it seriously, because if we are going to go forward, we just need to plan for it. And if we wait a year, right, the board may say, still not ready, let's wait a year. Again, it's another year in that process. That is a multi-year process, right? It takes time to get the approvals from the state education department. We usually try to do the work in the summer, right? So let's say we get approvals even in November. We basically want to say we have to wait until late June to start.
Right, but even using your timeline, if you waited another year, you would still be ready by the time your first debt service retired on that chart that you had before, because that's it that you said, okay, if we did it this next May, we'll be ready in 24, but our first debt service doesn't retire until 25, 26. So if we don't want to spend the additional money to do short-term borrowing, because short-term borrowing is going to be way more expensive than it was a year ago or 2 years ago, or maybe not in 2009, I don't know, but it's going to be expensive now. So those are just the things I'm thinking.
100% correct.
All right, so I have a couple of questions maybe for future presentations.
Sure.
I certainly don't expect answers tonight. If, I think you said it was $5.3 million is our debt service right now.
Part of it. It's actually
Okay.
about $8 million annually.
Okay.
So 5.3 falls off. I think it was 25, 26, and then the remaining.
Okay, so let's take the $8 million figure. $8 million of debt service, that equals $112 billion bond issue?
At the rates that we're seeing now, and let's be conservative, let's say 5%, we're talking about an $84 million level.
Okay,
So,
so we can do this wish list, but only up to $84 million.
That's right.
Okay, that's a really important thing
Yeah.
to remember, because I recall I was out there for the last bond issue, and I want to say it was like $350 million by the time everybody was done
Yeah,
wish
that's what it
listing.
was. Yeah.
And we ended up with 112 or 109 or
Yeah,
whatever.
about 100,
You know.
yeah.
So, so we need to keep our feet on the ground while we're doing our wish list.
Correct.
Okay, because certainly, like you, I don't want, to do a bond issue that's gonna have a tax impact. I mean, that's, now, for a future presentation, would you be able, just out of that 62.3 million or whatever it was, would you be able to tell us how much of that is air conditioning and how much of that is not air conditioning?
Absolutely.
Because it's broken down by building now, so it's hard to get a sense, because my thinking, I mean, you showed that one bond issue just on air conditioning that failed recently. And my thinking is at some point in this process, our community is gonna wanna know what we're looking to do and what things are gonna cost, so.
We can certainly do that, and it's probably in the ballpark of $35 to $40 million. But just as an option, while we're talking about this, what we can do is we can put two propositions up. We can have proposition one be air conditioning with the cost and the scope of work. And we can do proposition two is, everything else, so to speak, with a cost. So that if the board chose to do it that way, that then the community has a chance to weigh in on the air conditioning and also to weigh in on everything else.
Right. Okay, so $84 million is the number I'm holding you to, and everybody else. And that's all.
At the current 5% interest rate,
Right.
that's what it does.
Oh goodness, by the time we do this, it could be double that.
Hopefully not when speaking to our financial advisors, what they said is, the Fed's just raised the rates. They're probably going to raise it a little bit more in the next 2 weeks. And then what the analysts are saying is that they're going to come back down a little bit. So hopefully the 5% will be the high and in these, this period anyway. But, I hope it would be double that.
Okay. Okay, great, that's all I have, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Roman.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. DeVito. I just have a couple of comments. You really are looking for something, aren't you looking for a couple of board members to be on the subcommittee for capital improvements?
Yes, if they haven't already committed, I would love that.
Right, yeah, I'm seeing my comments already. I also, I think it's apropos that we're talking about capital along with the strategic plan, because the two are like a left and a right hand. They go together, they certainly complement each other, because as we move forward in terms of looking at where the district's gonna be in 5, 10, 15, and 20 years, we can't do that divorced from the discussion of the state of our buildings or at in terms of that. But I must be perfectly honest with you in terms of this, I get a little bit nervous with the whole notion of a bond. I get nervous about the notion of a bond because the city bonds for everything. And I think sometimes really because of that, it's developed a pretty nasty connotation. I thank you for this plan because although our first allegiance is to the schools, Mr. Kramer was kind enough to give me a tour of transportation, the transportation site. But I think it is pretty comprehensive because we can't lose sight of some of the other ancillary facilities that sort of supplement the schools in the district. And transportation certainly needs a dire intervention.
And if I may, Dr. Ryan, what I don't have here, what I will have the next time is the public library.
Right.
All right, Mr. Grillo had done that separately, and I will, in our next presentation, include the similar treatment that he did for the public library.
And as much confidence I have in you, and I sent bouquets to Ms. Saunders also, I worry about inflation and I worry about the economy in terms of this. I worry about supply and demand. I worry about what the cost of materials is going to be. I worry about the production of those materials, whether we're going to be able to access them 3 or 4 or 5 years from now. So I get a little bit wary in terms of numbers, because I don't know the degree of reliability that's built into them. I mean, I certainly trust your judgment, but I'm still skeptical, I guess that might be my nature. And I just wanted to chime in terms of when, historically, when we did go up for a budget vote, oftentimes we went for the spring, because we felt that that's when candidates get people out to vote, you know, in terms of the importance of this, rather than October is kind of a, it's not as keen an interest in October in terms of school, because people are just accustomed to, you know, that third Tuesday in May is school board week, and that's when budgets are voted on and those kinds of things. So I was certainly leaning towards a May vote rather than an October one. But thank you, and I'm hoping that the two dovetail strategic planning and capital, and I'm glad they're looking at all of the capital projects across district above and beyond building. And as for a budget vote, I would, if a bond vote, I would hope that it would be in the spring. And I'm just very, very wary of the notion of bond. Thank you.
Dr. Ryan, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito, for your presentation. I've served on the capital committees, and it is not an easy task to go through all of our buildings and to ensure that all of our buildings are being well maintained and that we are still serving our students. So it really takes a lot of thought. Mr. DeVito does take the lead on this, so I really want to thank you for all of that. And I also know that you take very good care in deciding upon what is needed, what we need, and what we really don't need. And I know, Mr. Kramer, you are also hands-on with that, so I want to thank you for your input as well. I'm still thinking that this might be too soon to talk, because we're still waiting to hear back from the steering committee and see what the steering committee survey results do decide upon, what they feel our community needs, because that is feedback from our city. So I personally would like to wait to hear what our steering committee has to say about all of that, and then build on from what they feel would be important for our schools, what is needed. I mean, now we're looking at bathrooms, of course, because we know the bathrooms need to be fixed, but other issues such as the ventilation or the turf grounds. Those are things that when our community wants them, we really need to hear more feedback from them and understand what they want before we move forward, since they're going to be the ones who are going to be voting on it, either May or October. I'm glad that you mentioned the timeline, because it does take the state forever to approve anything. And that honestly makes me worried about waiting to do all of these renovations as well, because all the prices are going up. It's insane how quickly the prices are rising and how we're going to be able to afford to do all of these renovations. So I look forward to hearing more. I look forward to hearing from the steering committee in January when we compile all the results. And I hope from there we can move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. I just would like to say this as a follow-up on this comment, that in the interim, we are going to start exploring some of these other ideas that have come forward already, just because that does take some time. So for example, when we heard some feedback about additional green spaces, we are going to start thinking about a lot of conversation with Mr. Grillo about what might that look like, you know, what can we leverage in terms of the natural resources we have here today. You know, we have so many buildings that are, you know, right on the water or close to the water, and what that could mean, you know, because it does take time, and that's, so I understand, you know, where you are, but that's why I wanted to at least resume the conversation tonight, because it takes time to plan and prepare. So, you know, in terms of maybe some other bathrooms that we may want to look at. You know, the HVAC part that we got the feedback on, that I feel like we did that homework already.
Right.
So we're pretty good on that scope and that cost. But some of the other ideas, we are going to spend the next couple of months, so that in January, when we do have more of a conversation and the board takes a decision, at least we have some information for you. Okay.
And I really appreciate you planning. I really do. I think that's fantastic, and I think that's why you put our capitals in such a great sequence. So I do appreciate that. I didn't want to take that away from you all. And I also look forward to serving on your capitals committee again.
Thank you, Mrs. Conway.
In that regard, I just want to caution everybody that it's ultimately the Board of Education that's going to, it's not the steering committee and it's not the questionnaire that's going to make the determination of where we go with the strategic plan. It's the board's obligation to make that decision. So So let's just keep that in mind, that every suggestion that comes up is not automatically, gonna be granted, it's not automatically gonna be on the wish list. You know, we have 5 elected members of the Board of Education who hopefully are gonna be able to make a decision about, based on all of the information from the community, the information from the steering committee, the information from the staff, and the information from you. But ultimately, it's our responsibility to make that choice. I just want us to keep that clear in our minds, as it gets a little foggy as we get all of this other input.
No, I thank you for bringing that up. Student organization announcements. Questions and comments from the public on tonight's agenda only. If you speak, please come up to the podium and please clearly state your name and address. Okay, so the treasurer's report for September 2022. I would like again to thank Mrs. Vito for always having transparency and bringing that up on the district website. Thank you so much. The approval of minutes for the executive session and regular meeting of October 11th, 2022, executive session of October 18th, 2022, and executive session and work session meeting of October 25, 2022. May I have a motion?
Motion made.
Second?
Second.
Dr. Ryan,
Any discussion?
any discussion?
No.
Ms. Verona, any discussion?
No.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Presentations of the superintendent.
I'd ask the board to consider item 1, strategic personnel as amended minus item 1.
Motion made.
Second.
Any discussion? Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
I'd ask the board to consider item 2, not strategic personnel.
We have a motion.
Motion.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
I'd ask the board to consider items 3 through 9.
We have a motion.
Motion.
Second. Any discussion? Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Item 10, there's no action required. It's the second reading of our policy on homebound instruction. And I'd ask the board to consider items 11 through 15.
May I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Any additional business of the Board of Education? Dr. Ryan?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the superintendent or participant, just, with all the COVID hysteria, there was a movement for outdoor education and for establishments of going outside and using whatever facilities we had. Since this was such a beautiful fall, and since the COVID hysteria is lifted, are those systems being used, or did they go away with COVID?
No, actually, it's interesting. The elementary schools still have the 15-minute play breaks when they actually reach class. And I think they've been going outside frequently. I know the middle school students still have some opportunity to go outside at lunchtime recess. Have not followed up with the high school on that, Dr. I don't know if the high school kids are still going out. But I would definitely say I see students outside much more frequently than we did prior, which is great.
I'd like to think the high schools are going out due to the Myers Pavilion in terms of the basketball courts and those tables that he put outside the high school there in terms of that, and hopefully maybe you might check with that and see if the Myers Pavilion is being used. These things.
Can we get a sign that says that, Myers Pavilion? Sorry. But that's what. I just would like to, just a quick question about our food services. I noticed that we did a farm to table a while back. How did that go?
So it's ongoing, it's not just a while back. We were able to get some strawberries and apples, and I know that Mr. Swan is continuing to work with local sources to get produce, milk, as much as we can from local farm deliveries. It's a little bit difficult sometimes to get the deliveries. I think that's been a bit of a struggle. You may have seen there was an article in Cool this looked in the newspaper, we're doing the same thing. It's, you just have to get to the 30%, which is sometimes more difficult, specifically if you're on Long Island and not close to the subsidy farms. But it's a big push for us, and it's something we hope to continue and extend.
That's good that the students are enjoying it. Thank you for doing that. I would also just like to remind everybody that tickets for Midsummer Night's Dream will be on sale November 17th and 18th and 19th. So I think that will be fabulous. And questions and comments from the public? Announcements, Long Beach Classroom Teachers Association,
No announcements.
Administrative Supervisory and PPS Group,
No.
LBSEA, Long Beach Schools Employee Association, Group C. Parent Teacher Association. Well then, may I make a motion to adjourn?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
All in favor, aye.
Have a great night, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay, Tom, look at this. Now, I read so many